The house in Elizabeth was bought, of course, with a mortgage by my father in about 1917. After my mother had insisted so much, because she wanted to get out of that patch, as we call it in the States, where the miners' houses are all built together, long rows of houses, one attached to the other, where all the men worked in the mine. And she was determined, even when she was married, that she was going to get out of that patch and move back into Elizabeth, where her own family was. And visits between Large and Elizabeth weren't very frequent because one had to walk. There were no means of conveyance, and one had to walk from Large to Elizabeth, which was about 5 miles away. So this young bride, who married her handsome husband at the age of 15 and a half, moved at first into Large with a sister of her husband, Aunt Ida. And there she was there for 3 months until they found their own little house, because each house was a 2-story house. Downstairs, a kitchen and a sort of a room. Couldn't say a living room, a room where there were a table and chairs, and then upstairs 2 bedrooms. Of course, there were no bathrooms; they were all privies, about at the end of the garden, away from the house, and all these privies were also in rows. So this was the life in a small mining town like Large, Pennsylvania. My mother had to work from 5 o'clock in the morning till about 11 o'clock at night, because shortly after she got her own little house, to be able to help pay expenses, she began taking in boarders, other young Italian men who arrived from Italy to work in the mines. And they had no houses, they had nobody to go to, so they would sleep there, and my mother fed them, cooked for them, and they slept there, and for a very, very paltry sum that they paid out of their miners' wages. And with this money, she was always able to get those little extra things that every young mother, every young housewife wants. A sewing machine. I remember she always talked about the first washing machine that my father bought her, which was a washing machine that you worked by turning a wheel, by turning a handle, and then this would turn some kind of a wheel inside with the clothes inside. And you had to go get your water at a well quite far away, and that my father used to do for her. He used to go and get the water and fill all her tubs and pails. But I must say that I don't remember anything of that life. Now I sometimes wonder now whether it's because I am unconsciously trying not to remember it, that it was unhappy. Although I never felt unhappy, I don't even now remember it as an unhappy period. Although I remember nothing about it. I don't remember my first days of school, which certainly must have been important, because I went to school for 3 years there. I remember some unpleasant incidents, but anyhow, those they never bothered me, because I really remember everything when I arrived in Elizabeth in the winter of 1918. And I was so surprised at this to me it seemed a big house, because downstairs there were 3 rooms. And from our windows, since we were on the hill, from one window you could see down in town at one church, the Methodist church. And then when you would run back to the kitchen, I would look out, and from another window on the other hill I could see the Catholic church. And this was a great experience, running from one room to another and seeing a different view from each room. So I only remember clearly, but I can't understand why I can remember everything that happened after that. I was then, not 9 yet, I was 8 and a half. Why I should remember everything that happened after we moved to Elizabeth and not remember one thing. I don't remember what the school was like. I don't remember who the children were with whom I must have played with children. I must have gone someplace, but I don't remember anything of my Large existence. That is, those years, except for instance, that we had a fire once, and I remember that my father was carrying my sister Eunice, who was then only a baby, 4 or 5 months old, and carrying her out of the house in the fire. I remember that. I remember another time that my father, they brought him home on a litter because he had been in a mine accident. Those are about, I think, the only 2 things that I really remember, the incidents that I remember the time that we lived in Large. So we moved into this house, which was to us a castle. They had 3 rooms downstairs, a kitchen and a sort of a dining room and a living room. And upstairs there were 3 bedrooms, which to us was a castle. And I remember going to school in Elizabeth. So this house was always a very, very happy house. My mother bought a piano right away. We had piano. And then she began working in this store, which my Uncle Marshall had. And he needed help, so she began helping him there, which my father disapproved, of course. And then came the flu. That was the fall of 1918. And everybody got ill. We were all ill. We were all sick. I remember that we were all upstairs, we 4 children, upstairs in bed, my poor father, my mother very, very ill, and he was going up and downstairs with cups of broth and cups of milk and so forth. I remember that distinctly, all of us sick in bed. And then finally my smallest brother, little Marshall, died and was buried, and my mother never knew about it because she was extremely ill. So we were all moved, the 3 of us were moved down to my grandmother's, which again was a very, very large house to me, down by the river. And Uncle Marshall's store was going very well, and you could tell that we had a big Christmas party. They had a big Christmas party for us, and we lived there for about 3 months with my grandmother while my mother was convalescing up at our house. And at the same time, my Uncle Joe, he was enrolled in the army just about 3 months before armistice. And I remember that she was so ill that he had a leave to come home to see her, because he was still in the United States. He never went overseas because the war ended. So she lingered on. She had pleurisy and must have had double pneumonia, pleurisy and so forth. She lingered on till about March 1919, always asking when we went to see her, where is Marshall? Where is little Marshall? And there were all the excuses. Well, it's too cold outside. He was a small baby and so forth. And so then finally in the spring they told her that he was dead. And then she had a relapse. So we went on to the summer. I remember this period quite distinctly. But the house was always a happy house because my mother always allowed us to bring all our friends home to this house. And every time some catastrophe, something happened, you had to get a new mortgage on the house. And so then you had to work to pay off this mortgage. That's why when 4 years ago I asked her to sign over her half of the house to Frieda, and she signed it, and she said, how many times I bought this house? And she had to go. So we went to school, and we all worked immediately. 10 years of age, we were put in the store to help behind the counter, helping to earn some money to help always at home. All of us, Dean and I and little Enos, poor little Enos, they had to put a stool under her feet because she was so small. She couldn't look over the counter in the bakery shop. And I, about 12 years of age, I began tutoring my fellow students, in math, in Latin, in everything. You began, won't you come and help Anne with her lessons after school? Won't you come and help Bill? He can't do his arithmetic and so forth. So at that time, I graduated from selling buns and pies, which I liked. I liked very much working in the store. I liked that immensely. I'd go down in the morning and work behind the counter. And then it was on Saturday. And then when we came home for supper, because the stores were open until 10 o'clock, we would come home for supper. Then you got dressed up. I would get a pretty dress on, and be serving still after the counter until 10 o'clock. So I remember it as a very happy period as working in the store. And so does Enos and Dean. We all worked in the store. And what did we do? We went to school, and we had to pass. We had to pass because this determination of my mother. You didn't dare come home with a bad mark, and you didn't dare come home with the second prize or number second, because she said, what's the matter with the first? Where is it? She was such determination she had, and such ambition for us. She said, these of mine, they must get out of this. They must get out of this life that we've had. And my father continued working for my Uncle Marshall because he was a stolid, good plodder. He just worked and was honest and was responsible, but he never had any imagination or any fantasy, any imagination at all. He just worked, came home and ate and worked in his garden. He made a garden for us. And I don't remember his ever laughing, ever smiling. I don't remember his ever being happy. Strange it was. And yet at the table we would all tell all these things and our experiences of the day and what had happened. And he must have been a Dean must have taken after him. In fact, Mother said, Nonna always said that when she went home these last years, and she said he was just like his father. I mean, he would sit there not ever saying a word. She said, I don't know how Pauline lives with him, because he never said a word. He would just sit there and eat, and then go in the read his newspaper, and didn't even look at TV, read his newspaper, and never talked. Never talked. She said, Dean, why don't you say something? He'd smile and wouldn't say anything. So we had our friends. We were always allowed to bring our friends home. And Nonna always had biscuits and cookies. Not too many. It was always done sparingly and frugally, you know. It was always done. But we were never allowed. We always said, you bring your friends home. Bring your friends here, and you can sit in the garden, play in the garden. And then we were sent out. We had to go and pick blackberries and pick apples, and we had to do all the picking of the fruits with which she made jam and jellies and pies and cakes. And we used to go out and pick blackberries and get all scratched up. There was a hill beyond our house. It wasn't built up. There were no houses there, and it was all, you know, bushes, blackberry bushes and raspberry bushes. And then finally came the great day that I won this scholarship to Pitt. And the family was called in to decide, shall she go to the university or shall she not? And my Uncle Marshall, who was considered the head of the family, because he was the one that had you know, held meetings for the unions, had been blackballed from all these mining camps. He would go up and down the river, Monessen, Charleroi, Bunola, all these places that all had mines, and he would talk with the miners, saying they shouldn't go in and work for these wages. And so he had been blackballed. They even called out the police, you know, because these mining companies had their own police. They had everything. They had this camp with all the houses where the miners worked. And the miners never got their salaries but they had also a store there where you had to buy all your food. So you bought your food there. By the time they took away for your rent. They took away from the food that you had. They took away from nothing. You had an accident, or you had burned something or broken something in the mine. So there was always very little left from these miners' checks when they stood in line outside where the checking office was to get that paltry sum that they had. So Uncle Marshall, even at that age, and Uncle Mike helped him too, he went up and down. He would stand on boxcars outside of this, because he couldn't go in, because the police the men with armed guns would send him out. Say, get out or we'll shoot. So he decided, just like all the Italians, most of them, the Italians that arrived to the States, that the best thing was to get a little shop. And that's what all Italian immigrants do. They get a little shop. And so he began, and that was the unfortunate thing. At that moment, when he began that shop, instead of asking my father to go in with him, he asked another man, because my father didn't have any money. And so this other Italian had some money. What, $1,000. He had some money. And so this man went into him as a 50%. And he was the one they really made, not millions, but I suppose they became very, very wealthy. And all his others, his two younger brothers, because there were still two younger brothers in their teens when he began this shop. Uncle Joe and Uncle Ernie were in their teens. And so he put them to work there. And they finally, of course, they were a little bit more intelligent, and shortly, when they were about 30, they insisted, no, we become shareholders, or we go away. And since they were so very good, one was the manager of one shop, and one was the buyer of all the meats of all the stores, which is a big position, and so they became shareholders. Uncle Joe and Uncle Ernie became shareholders, fortunately, at least they were. So, and then Aunt Lizzie her husband became the baker. He was the baker in the baker shop, because he had everything. He had a big baker shop, pasticceria and bakery shop, and a big meat shop. You know, the really things done in grand style. I suppose in these days. Well, he finally lived to see his supermarkets. He finally lived to see, 3 stores, I think. Yes, he finally lived to see 3 stores. I suppose in this day and age he would be something like, I don't know what standa, Rinascente he would have been, because he really had. He was the most intelligent one of the whole group. aside from my mother, because mother was she never went to school. Went 1 year to school, and then she was put to work by her family, because there were 9 people to feed in the family, because she had a sister who died at the age of 26, Esther, whom I never knew, of course, and left 3 children. And so her husband thought that there was nothing better than taking these 3 children and dumping them on my grandmother's lap. 3 children that were about, I don't know, 1 year, 3, and 5. And then the 6th that she already had, that made 9 children in the house. So that's why my mother got married so young, because they thought, well, there's one mouth less to feed in the house. And off they sent this poor young girl at 15 and a half to get married. Married her off, although she must have wanted to get married. She must have seen it perhaps as a means of escape too. But she used to take down all the, she gave English lessons to all the young miners around. She would take everybody to the hospital. She would take everybody to the doctor. She wrote all the letters back and forth from Italy. She would take them to the bank, and she always tells a story that one day the banker said, "Mary, go to school, and when you're finished school, you come here and you'll have a job here in our bank. You come in our bank." Her mother sent her out washing clothes. Anyhow, the decision was made. Uncle Marsh said, "No, I think she should go to the university." So what was there to do? In those days, you didn't choose what you wanted to do. You had to choose something that you had to get out to work right away. And so what did I choose? I chose teaching, education. There was nothing else to be done, because I had to get out to work, because there were 3 behind me. And certainly with what my father was earning, nobody would ever go to the university. I mean, we always had the essentials. We only had the essentials, but we really lived very, very frugally. Mother even sewed for people. She sewed dresses. I remember that I used to do all the hems and the cuffs. But we were happy. I always remember that as a happy time. And so does Enos, and so does Dan. Of course, Dan came much later. Dan came in 1922, so that was much later. I went to the university in 1926, and there again it was always push, try to get ahead, get as many credits as you can. And finally, I did 4 years in 3. The credits that you're supposed to have, which I don't remember now, how many credits you're supposed to have for a degree, whether it's 30 credits. I got the correct number in 3 years and graduated. And I graduated right in the Depression time in 1929, where people were in queues on streets selling apples. It was the one time in the States where, it was the only time in the States where people could have a maid in the house if you could feed her. I mean, she would come to the door and say, "Can you take me to sleep and eat, and I'll work for nothing?" You know, that was the only time in the States, in the history of the United States, that you could have a maid just for the food and lodging that you gave her. And so I got out just at this time, you can imagine. So it was Uncle Mike, though. Uncle Mike was on the school board in Clareton. And he talked with the school board, and they needed a teacher. They needed a French teacher. They needed somebody just to fill in every place. I had French classes, Latin classes, and math classes, all at once. I mean, what we had left over French class, it was mine. There were too many people in the Latin one, so the others that were left over were mine. And then I taught algebra and geometry. And I began teaching. That's all. And everything you earned, of course, you gave to your mother, because you had to. The family had to go ahead. And then 3 years later came along Dean, so we paid Dean's tuition. And then he began as a doctor, began in pre-med, but after 3 months changed over to engineering. And then 1 year later came Enos, and so also Enos's tuition. And she too took teaching, so she could get out and begin working. And so there we were. We worked. But it was a happy time. We had lots of young people, just like you have here. Young people coming in, like Andrea has come in and played the piano and sit around and talk on the porch outside. Not wild things. I of course at the university began going to concerts and theater, because I got one of those very, very sought after positions of being an usher at the symphonies. You had to have certain marks. You had to have university girls and university men were ushers at the symphony concerts. So finally I got into that group, so I had all the symphony concerts. And it was a happy time. We we went to plays and we went to dances and we had friends. We never had any vacations. We never went anywhere for vacation. We learned to swim in the river against my parents' wishes. They never knew it, of course. They never knew that we went down to the river to swim, because that was they were so afraid. That's why I never learned to ride neither Dean. We never had a bicycle. We never had skates. Everybody else would go out ice skating, but we never could go because they were so afraid of our being hurt and getting into an accident. So we never had any bicycles or ice skates or roller skates, and we never went swimming. But then finally, about 25, 26, 23, they opened up a big swimming pool out where one of the shops is. And there, then with these uncles, because I must say we were very lucky, we had these two younger uncles. One uncle, Uncle Ernie, was 3 years older than I. He was born in 1906. I'm born in 1909. And the other Uncle Joe was born in 1898. So he was, 11 years older than I. That wasn't very much. So they would take us out in the car and we'd go driving around the country. And then they finally began taking us to the swimming pool. This big swimming pool opened and everybody would go. We would go at night swimming after work. In the summertime, we worked in the store again, or I began going to Columbia. I went to Columbia for 2 summers at that time. Always wanting to see something new, to learn something new, to see how they did it up there. And I went to Columbia 2 summers. And then finally in 1935,
What was Elizabeth?
Elizabeth is a typical small town, of which America has millions and millions and millions of towns, where the entire life of the town is concentrated around school. There's nothing else. There was one movie house, and there was everything is concentrated around the school football team, the school basketball team, the school orchestra, the school band. There was a school play, all the events, and of course church activities. There was nothing else. People are interested. People went to the concert the school band was having on Friday evening, for example. People would go to the school play at the end of the year that the high school was having. Then they would have on the 4th of July, they would have a big gymnastic celebration of the children. Everything was centered only about school and church activities. Of course, we also lived almost in a semi-rural area, and outlying all around Elizabeth were all the farms. We have in America a club which is called the 4-H Club. I don't even know what the H's are. Anyhow, it's a rural farming club, and it's a national all over the United States, and they have fairs and they have exhibitions. These young people.